Dean Martin was 20 feet from the stage when the room made a sound he'd learned to fear. Not applause, not laughter, but a single collective gasp, 3,000 people inhaling at the same time. In show business, laughter means success, silence means trouble, but a gasp means something has already gone wrong. Through the dressing room wall, Dean heard Sammy's voice, thinner than it should have been, tight with strain. Then another voice tore through it, louder, slurred, drunk with authority. "You think you're funny, Sammy? You think you can make jokes about me?" Dean felt the blood leave his face. He didn't need to see the man to know who it was. Everyone in Las Vegas knew that voice, knew what followed it, knew how often it ended with someone in the hospital or worse. The voice belonged to a man who controlled half the Strip, who broke bones when he felt disrespected, who never forgave humiliation. And right now, he wasn't in a casino office or a backroom. He was on Sammy Davis Jr.'s stage. Dean opened the dressing room door. The hallway had gone still. Stagehands stood frozen, eyes fixed forward, bodies refusing to move. Someone whispered Dean's name like a warning as he stepped toward the stage entrance, each step pulling him closer to a moment he wouldn't be able to walk away from. Dean stepped into the hallway and felt the temperature change. Stagehands weren't moving. No one was laughing anymore. Someone whispered his name like a warning. He started toward the stage entrance anyway, every step pulling him closer to something he couldn't undo. 3 nights earlier, Sammy Davis Jr. had been doing what Sammy always did, working the room, dancing between charm and precision, tossing out a joke about friends in the hospitality business who made offers you couldn't refuse. The audience had laughed because it was clever and because Sammy knew exactly where the line was supposed to be. Angelo hadn't laughed. Angelo didn't believe in lines unless he was the one drawing them. Now Angelo was on the stage. He'd climbed the steps like he owned the place, 3rd row to spotlight without asking permission, the band dying mid-note when they saw his face. The crowd thought it was part of the act for exactly 3 seconds, until they saw Sammy's eyes flick toward the wings, calculating, searching. Angelo stood too close, breath hot, smile wrong. "You're not Frank," Angelo said. "You're not Dean." Then he said the word that emptied the room of air. Sammy didn't move at first. He stood there in his tailored suit under the lights he'd earned, jaw set, hands open, voice low when he answered. "Don't ever call me that." The restraint in it was harder than anger, and Angelo took it as an invitation. "Or what?" Angelo said, leaning in. "Your friends aren't here." Sammy asked him to leave the stage. Not loudly. Not weakly. Just enough for everyone to hear. Angelo laughed and hit him for it, a sharp, ugly sound echoing off the walls as Sammy went down hard. Blood showed immediately against his lip, red and undeniable. No one moved. Not security. Not the band. 3,000 people watched a man decide whether standing up was worse than staying down. That was when Dean Martin stepped through the curtain. A stagehand grabbed his arm, voice shaking, begging him to stop, listing the reasons like they might slow him down. Dean pulled free without looking back. Sammy was on the floor. That was the only fact that mattered. Dean walked onto the stage the way he walked into every room, unhurried, shoulders loose, expression calm enough to be dangerous. He saw the blood. He saw the man standing over his friend. He saw an entire city holding its breath. And in that moment, Dean understood this wasn't about stopping a fight. This was about whether anyone in Las Vegas could still say no. Dean didn't raise his voice. He didn't hurry. He stopped between Angelo and Sammy and let the silence do the work, the kind of silence that makes men reveal themselves. Dean looked down first, not at Angelo, but at Sammy, still on the floor, blood on his mouth, pride taking the longer road back to his eyes. You all right, pal? Dean asked. Sammy nodded once. I'm okay. You shouldn't be here. Dean straightened and finally looked at Angelo. Up close, the man smelled like whiskey and certainty, the kind that comes from never being told no. Angelo smiled when he recognized him, wide and satisfied, like the night had just improved. Well, look who showed up, Angelo said. Dean Martin himself. Maybe you can explain to your boy how respect works. Dean didn't smile back. You're done, he said, quiet enough that only the front rows could hear it. You're going to leave the stage. You're going to leave the showroom. And you're not coming back. Angelo laughed and spread his hands as if Dean had told a joke. He talked about ownership, about casinos, about who really decided who worked and who disappeared. He leaned closer, testing distance, testing fear, waiting for Dean to blink. Dean didn't. He stepped closer instead, close enough that Angelo had to tilt his head back to keep eye contact. You hit my friend, Dean said. In front of witnesses. That makes this very simple. Angelo's smile thinned. You threatening me? I'm giving you a choice, Dean said. Walk off the stage right now, or I make sure every headline act in the city knows exactly what you did. Then you can own every casino on the strip and still play to empty rooms. The room shifted. Angelo felt it before he saw it, heads turning, whispers starting, the audience no longer frozen but leaning forward. His 3 associates stood from their table, hands visible, waiting. 10 seconds passed. Then 10 more. Angelo searched Dean's face for something loose, something he could grab onto. He found nothing. Dean stood there like a door that wouldn't open no matter how hard you kicked it. This isn't over, Angelo said, backing away. Yes, it is, Dean replied. He turned slightly, just enough to make room, and Angelo took it, stepping down off the stage under the weight of 3,000 eyes. Security finally moved, too late to matter, escorting a man who no longer looked certain of anything. The applause didn't start right away. It crept in carefully, unsure if it was allowed, then grew into something uncontrollable. Dean helped Sammy to his feet and held him there until the shaking stopped. You didn't have to do that, Sammy said, voice breaking. He's going to come after you. Dean shrugged. Let him try. Dean took the microphone, waited for the room to settle, and spoke without heat or performance. He said Sammy's name. He said the word friend. He said if anyone had a problem, they could bring it to him. Nothing more. Nothing extra. He handed the microphone back and walked off stage without a bow, the applause following him like a debt being repaid. Backstage, the same stagehands stared at him like he'd just watched someone step in front of a moving train. Dean, he whispered. What did you just do? Dean looked back toward the stage once, making sure Sammy was still standing. I drew a line, he said. And in Las Vegas, lines never went unanswered. The calls started before Dean finished changing his jacket. Word didn't travel in Las Vegas, it detonated, jumping from casino to casino, showroom to showroom, carried by bartenders, pit bosses, and men who made a living knowing things early. By midnight, everyone on the strip knew Dean Martin had forced Angelo Martinelli off a stage, and no one could agree whether that meant Dean was fearless or already dead. Frank Sinatra called first, voice sharp with anger that had nowhere to land. Not at Dean, but at the absence. He swore about timing, about bad luck, about how things should have gone if he'd been there. Joey Bishop called next, then others, each conversation circling the same question without asking it directly. Are you safe? Dean answered them all the same way. He was calm. He was home. Sammy was fine. The call Dean didn't expect came just after 1 in the morning. The voice on the other end didn't shout. It didn't threaten. It didn't need to. The man introduced himself politely, someone higher up than Angelo, someone who didn't drink on stage or throw punches in public. He said he'd heard about the incident and wanted to be very clear. Angelo had been wrong. He said it like a verdict. Wrong to climb on stage. Wrong to hit an entertainer in front of witnesses. Very wrong to use language that turned a business problem into a liability. Las Vegas survived on illusion, and Angelo had shattered it in front of 3,000 paying customers. "You're not calling to scare me," Dean said. "No," the man replied. "I'm calling to close this." Angelo had been told to stay away from Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. permanently. No retaliation. No messages. No accidents. What happened was bad for business, and business always won. Then the voice hardened just slightly. "Don't make a habit of this, Dean. We can't have performers challenging authority every time emotions run high. Tonight was an exception because the situation forced our hand." Dean said he understood, even as he realized he'd stepped into a space where understanding was just another word for caution. The next morning, Dean was asked to meet at a coffee shop off the Strip, the kind of place that didn't ask questions and didn't remember faces. The same man was already seated when Dean arrived, suit neat, coffee untouched. In daylight, he looked ordinary enough to be missed entirely. "What you did took guts," the man said. "Stupid guts, but guts." Angelo had been contained. Sammy was under protection now, as much as anyone ever was. But Dean needed to hear the rest of it in person. He'd won because the circumstances were extreme, because Angelo had crossed a line so publicly that even his own people couldn't defend him. That alignment wouldn't happen twice. "Next time," the man said, "there may not be anyone to pull you out." Dean listened, nodding once, absorbing it without argument. "If someone goes after Sammy again," he said, "I'll do the same thing." The man studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. "Let's hope there isn't a next time." They shook, and that was that. Dean left the shop knowing the city would never quite feel the same again. He hadn't beaten the mob. He hadn't changed the rules. He'd exposed a weakness, a moment where even power had to retreat to protect itself. That knowledge carried weight. Sammy called later that afternoon, voice softer than usual. He didn't talk about fear or gratitude. He talked about dinner, about music, about getting back to work. But before he hung up, he said it. "I won't forget what you did." Dean didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. Some debts weren't meant to be repaid with words. And somewhere in Las Vegas, men who controlled everything understood something new. There were still things money couldn't buy, and lines that, once crossed, came with consequences they couldn't erase. Sammy Davis Jr. went back on stage that night with a split lip and steady hands, finishing the show because stopping would have meant something else had won. He sang, danced, and bowed, but the room never quite settled again. People weren't just watching a performance anymore. They were witnessing a decision that had already been made and couldn't be taken back. Backstage later, Sammy sat quietly while a doctor cleaned the cut. Dean stayed nearby without hovering, letting the normalcy return at its own pace. When Sammy finally looked up, his voice was low and certain. "You stood in front of him like he couldn't touch you." Dean shrugged. He couldn't. That night became a story before it became history. Dealers whispered it over cards. Lounge singers repeated it like a warning. A Rat Pack legend without music, without jokes, just a moment where someone said no and meant it. Some called Dean reckless. Others called him brave. Most understood he'd done something rarer than either. He'd made the city hesitate. Years passed. Las Vegas changed costumes, swapped faces, learned new ways to hide old truths. The mob loosened its grip, slowly, unevenly, pretending it had always planned to. But among performers, the story stayed sharp. If someone asked where the line was, someone else would say Dean Martin drew it. Sammy never softened the memory. When people asked him who his closest friend had been, he didn't hesitate. Frank was the leader, he said. Frank was the engine. But Dean was the one who would die for you. He said it plainly, without poetry, because the truth didn't need decoration. He didn't flinch, Sammy said once. That's how I knew. Dean never corrected the story. He didn't add details. He didn't trade on it. He knew how close it had come to ending differently, how much luck had been folded into that calm walk across the stage. Courage mattered, but timing mattered too, and Dean understood the difference. What stayed with him wasn't the applause or the calls or even the threat. It was the moment he'd seen Sammy on the floor, deciding whether standing up would cost him more than staying down. Dean had taken that choice away, not with force, but with presence. In a city built on illusion, that mattered. March 8, 1964 wasn't remembered for a hit song or a big win at the tables. It was remembered because a man who could have walked away didn't. Because friendship outweighed fear. Because for one night, power met something it couldn't bully into silence. Dean Martin didn't change Las Vegas. He didn't dismantle anything. He just proved that even in a place ruled by money and menace, there were still lines that meant something when someone was willing to stand on them. And sometimes, that's enough.